Hello everyone. For this week's submission, I'd like to demonstrate how to solder a wire together. Now, soldering is very important for an electrician, simply for the fact that we use it to connect broken wires or to complete circuits. And in aircraft, we use it for certain types of systems. For example, thermocouples, where you are required to have more permanent wiring capability. Now, in order to do that, there are certain components you'll need. To start off with, I'd like to start off with safety. Now, a soldering iron uses high temperatures, and when you're using high temperatures, it's very important that you keep very focused on what you're doing and protect yourself from getting burned or creating a fire for that matter. So, looking over at our soldering iron, I'd like to point out that it has its little case right here that holds the soldering iron. Now, the iron right now is already heated, and at the tip there's a ceramic point. Now, the ceramic point is used to heat the solder and let it be applied to the surface that we're going to be soldering. It also has a sponge, in which case you must make sure it's moist at any time, so you can place the ceramic tip on it and remove any residual solder from it. Now, also goggles. While you're working with solder, it's very important that you protect your eyes. Now, a lot of people feel that if they're wearing glasses, just normal reading glasses or such, that it'll work. However, that'll only work if it's coming directly at your eye. It doesn't protect the peripherals. So I always recommend everyone to wear goggles. Another key component when you're soldering is that it sets off a toxic fume. So it's very important to have a ventilated area. We already have our windows open and we have our vents running. Therefore, everything is in a safe environment. Some of the other components that we have here that we're going to be using is we have diagonal cutters, and they're commonly referred to as dikes, and we're going to be using that to cut wire and also cut residual wire, leftover excess wire after the solder or before the solder, however your preference is. We have solder itself. Obviously, you can't solder without the solder, and we use the solder to heat up and actually adjoin the two wires or the circuit that you're using. Now, this is a rosin core that we use a lot on aircraft and plumbing. Also, they use it on a lot of other wiring circuits. However, it's not good on electronic circuit boards because the rosin core will cause corrosion. So they tend to use an electronic circuit board solder. It's all lead-free in order to avoid corrosion in the future. Now, something else that we use when we're soldering is flux. This is a flux pen, and flux is simply nothing more than a coating that's going over the surface in order to clean it and make it, while the solder is oxidizing, to create a better adhesive surface. And I'll show you how to use it. It's a very simple application. Like I said, we have our soldering iron, or our solder, and in order to remove solder, even though we're not going to, I'd like to show you some of the tools that we have to remove solder. This here is solder wick. Solder wick is nothing more, if you can see, is nothing more than copper braid. And copper braid, when the solder is heated and in a liquid form, you can apply this wick to it, and it will adhere to this wick and remove it. We also have a tool that is commonly referred to as a solder sucker. Now, a solder sucker is nothing more than a spring compressed vacuum where you press down the top right here, and it's going to press a grommet down. And once you depress this button right here, it's going to suck air through this vent, and while the solder is heated, it's just going to pull it straight in and remove the solder. And you usually just depress it in order to push the solder back out. I also have a multimeter here. Multimeter is what we're going to use to check the electrical properties of the wire after we're done soldering and make sure it's working. We also have wire cutters. Wire cutters, crimpers. It's basically a splicing tool. In which case, you can get these at any hardware store, and they have crimping points for different size crimps. It has your ignition terminals and coax fittings, is when you're working with coax wire, and wire cutters, but we have diagonal cutters for that. And most importantly, especially for this, it has wire strippers. Now, the wire strippers are broken down in different gauges based on the different size wires. We'll be using the smallest one because the wire that we're going to be using is 22 gauge wire. So let's get started for solder. Now, it's a very simple process. It's not hard at all. First thing that we'll be doing is you want to get your wire. Now we've already pre-cut it, so very simple enough. It's like we're just going to go through the motions. Alright, so you take your diagonal cutters, cut the wire, or if it's already broken, you don't have to cut it, and just, or if you prefer, cut it more, make it more of a clean cut. It's completely up to the technician or the user. Now what I like to do is I like to feather and flare out the wire strands. It's like it can be careful with it, try not to prick yourself. Okay, so I did that wire, let's do it with this one. Flare it out, feather it, and you'll see why I'm doing this in a second. Now what I like to do is try and get as good of a contact between the wires prior to soldering. Okay, so I take the wire, I overlay them, and I mesh the feathering together. Right? And then twist the wire. Twisting the wire is like a lot of old technicians felt was good to work on cars. You'll see it a lot where there's twisted wire and nothing more than electrical tape holding them together. That's not quite ideal for a trained technician. But it's like for anyone who's doing home remedies, it's like they tend to use it a lot. I was like, I prefer not to because it doesn't have a whole lot of reliability to it, and it's a little unsafe, especially when you're dealing with bare wire and electricity. All right, so when you pull it apart, you'll have a little braid right there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use flux, and I'm going to coat the wire. Just simple application, nothing crazy. Take the flux pen and just coat it. Okay, and that's going to be cleaning the surface. Okay, then once you're done fluxing, it's important to make sure the flux is still moist when you're doing it. Now, a lot of people have different techniques when doing it. Me personally, I like to have something holding on to the component that I'm working on, so I don't have to juggle around with my hands. However, in this case, we're going to be using the table. I'll move the solder out of the way so you can kind of get a better view. Okay. There we go. All right. So you take your solder. All right. Just take a strand of it. I like to hold it in my hand and let it know. Some people like to actually have it on the component that they're soldering. Take the soldering iron. All right, and apply heat to the solder, and it will melt. And it's like, as you can see, the solder is being applied to the wire itself. Okay, and voila! Now that you have solder onto the wire, it's like you now have an effective combination for connection. Now to check our connection, I'm going to simply take our multimeter and I'm going to put it on resistance in order to check continuity to make sure it is one complete circuit. And all I'm going to simply do is touch the ends, in which case we should be showing a certain number of resistance. Now if you look right there, it's like we're showing resistance. It's a little off because I'm touching it, but since we are showing resistance, it tells you that we have continuity and a complete circuit. Now it was simple enough how to solder a wire. Like I said, if you're going to do this at your house, I completely recommend looking further into it and using a guide before you do it. And it's like, be safe, obviously. And I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this benefits everyone in the future. So it's like, I hope you enjoy.